Across the tracks. Across the tracks. It's time to go. We're going across the tracks. Across the tracks with Matt Warnock today. Matt Warnock, thanks for coming on in.
Well, thanks for having me.
This is brilliant. We are going to do something I have yet to do on Across the Tracks. We're going to go across the tracks on a purely instrumental album. And we are going over your album called Homecoming. Mm-hmm. So give us some background. When did the album get recorded and the genesis of putting an album together?
So the album began, we started recording it in August of 2022, and then we released it in April of 2023. So it was a bit of a process, about 7 or 8 months, I guess, total. I worked with Dustin Jones, a local producer and recording engineer, and we recorded at his studio, Mission Controls. And we did it in a very sort of unique way, something I hadn't done before. So we met every Thursday. We still do. We meet every Thursday to record. And so I would start writing the song on Friday morning, and then I would let it sit over the weekend, and then I would sort of play with it from Monday through Wednesday, just sort of getting some ideas of what melodies, maybe some chords. And then Thursday morning, I'd go into the studio, and Dustin and I would record for 2 hours, and we would just record the song. We would just lay it down, usually, one take for the sound, for the tone, get some ideas going. He'd give me some feedback, and then we would just get one take down, mostly improvised, and then that was it. We put it in the can and be done with it. I would never play the song again because I go to the next song. And we did this for, from August through about February, and then we did the mixing and mastering after that. It was a very organic process. It was very cool.
Yeah, cool. You didn't show up, obviously, there with this. You came from a big background. So Give me some background of your music and how you got to the point where, hey, I'm good enough to do an album. I have ideas for an album. But give me the run-up, the years that it took to get there.
Sure. Well, the Coles Notes version, because it's a little bit long, would be I started playing guitar at Sir James Dunn in Mark Goff's class back in the mid-'90s. And from there, I just fell in love with playing, and I did some classical guitar, and then I met Val Suriano and started doing some jazz and jazz guitar. Sir James Dunn had a jazz band for about a year. I don't think they had one before or after that. But
we're in the 1990s here?
Yeah, this is about 95, 96.
Okay.
Around that time. And I fell in love with jazz and improvisation, and so I started studying with Val a little bit and some local musicians. Ended up going to school in Montreal at McGill, got my undergrad, moved to the U.S., got my master's and my doctorate in jazz guitar performance, toured around a lot, performed a lot.
And where did that happen in the U.S.?
So I went to Western Michigan for my master's and Illinois for my doctorate. And during that time, I was teaching a lot, I was playing a lot of gigs, I was recording, but it was mostly in groups, and it was mostly sort of pre-rehearsed jazz, but it was like melody, improvisation, melody, like there was a structure and a form and all that. And over the years, I kind of got more interested in the free improvisation or the open playing, where you go in with an idea rather than a form or a structure. It's like, okay, I have this melodic idea and this progression maybe and a little bit of idea over here, and then I bring them all together in the moment, and I create the song.
Well, this is great. I'm going to get a great education here about music and jazz in particular. So let's get at the album. And before we get to the first song, Homecoming. Why the title?
Because I've been gone for about 20 some years. I left in 1998. I moved to Montreal, and I moved back in 2022. And so it was my homecoming back to the Sioux, is my hometown. And the album cover art for the album, or the cover art for the album, is my family's cottage up in Island Lake, and there's a nice picture we had of it, and then we had it sort of animated and colored in and done by a local artist, which was very cool. And so,
give me the name. Who's the artist?
I don't remember. It was done by a friend of mine as like a gift, so I didn't. Yeah.
Sorry, Bal.
I know.
All right. So one of the fascinating things is that, to this untrained ear, they're just song titles. Mm-hmm. And now I'm going to find out that there are stories behind. And so we're going to go with Bellow Master. Well, Master is the master I'm taking.
Yeah.
Bellow is the name.
Bellow is the title.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Bellow is the name of this track we're going to listen to first.
Yeah, so Bellow is Portuguese for beautiful.
Hey, I'm
roughly.
Portuguese. I know this.
Beleza. I used to live in Brazil. I spent a lot of time there. My wife is a Portuguese translator and did a lot of her PhD research in Brazil in musicology. And so I've lived there and taught there and played there a lot. And we lived in a city called Belo Horizonte, the beautiful horizon. And so I wrote this song. Well, I wrote the melody as my idea for the song, and then the rest was done in the studio. But it was just to showcase the city, and it's a big city. You've probably never heard of it. It's the third biggest city in Brazil. It's about 7+ million people, about the size of Toronto probably. And it's up in the mountains, and there's these beautiful hills all around, and it's just a wonderful, cool place. And I played a lot of music there, and I wrote this song for that.
Yeah, so when you decide that you're going to write a love song, by the sounds of it, to this city, do you go up in, so to speak, the Hollywood Hills and look down on the city and serenade it? Is that what goes on?
Pretty close, actually. To be honest, there's a square at the top of a mountain right where we used to live, where the Pope spoke back in the 80s, and so it's the Pope Square. And from there, you can see basically the entire city and all the mountains around the city, and there's a giant public park up there. And as I was writing this song, I was kind of envisioning the time I used to spend up there and overlooking the city. So it's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
And in the course of the song, is there something that you're always looking to feature? Yeah,
so here it's mostly the rhythm, and so it's the rhythm and the melody. So in Brazilian music, the rhythm, it's meant for dancing, like there's samba and bossa nova and baião and frevo and these dance rhythms. And on this track, it's a samba, which is a dance in Brazil. And a lot of Brazilian music has a really heavy emphasis on melody. I mean, very singable, melodic ideas. You think of Tom Jobim and João Gilberto and all these great, Caetano Veloso and these great composers and songwriters. And so I was really focusing on, okay, I want to get a strong samba rhythm, and then I want to have a real big focus on a melody that reminded me of the songs that I played when I was living in Brazil.
Well, awesome. We're going to give this a listen now, and it changes everything to my ears.
Excellent.
And it's going to come alive. Let's give it a listen. Beautiful. You had said before we played bellow, you try to find the melody. And explain melody to me, because often I hear the song and I think, isn't the whole thing a melody? But it isn't, is it? Explain exactly what melody is.
So for me, melody is the main idea that we're listening to at any given point. It doesn't have to be the highest note. It can be the lowest note. It can be in the middle of the chord. But it's the main theme or thread that we're listening to in the music. And on guitar, we're trying to, when I'm playing a solo record like this, I'm trying to put the melody at the forefront, but that could be putting it as a bass riff, or it could be putting it on top of the chord. But it's the line that, has some development to it. It either repeats, it develops, it comes back later in the song, but it's the sort of main focus you're hearing. So when you're listening to any instrumental song, if you're hearing one instrument, if it's a group, or one note sort of popping out on guitar, that's the melody line. And then the rest is the accompaniment, or comping, as we call it in jazz. And so when I'm playing these songs, I'm thinking like a pianist. So I have the melody as my right hand, and that's what I'm trying to bring out as the louder note. And then I have the chords, which is the comping, like the left hand of a piano, and I'm doing that at the same time on guitar, and that's what I'm trying to emulate when I'm playing these songs.
Would it be accurate for me then, in songs where there's a vocalist, that the vocalist is usually doing the melody line?
Yes, and if there's no vocalist, if there's a vocalist, they're singing the melody.
Of course.
Yes, and if there's no vocalist, it's usually then it goes like sax and trumpet, which are more like lead instruments. And then it could be piano, it could be guitar, sometimes it's even bass, even great drummers do melodies on drums, which is very cool. But most of the time, it's a vocalist and then the horns, at the forefront, because they're the higher instruments and the loudest, and
awesome.
They cut through.
Great lesson. I'm loving it. Let's get to the next song here, Denner Street.
Yes. So Denner Street is a real street. It's in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I did my master's degree, like I said earlier, at Western Michigan University, and I met my wife, and she lived on Denner Street. And
another love song.
Yes, it's a little bit of a love song. There's a kind of a tragedy in the beginning, and then it becomes better at the end. But when I first met my wife, we were together for maybe 6 weeks or so. We just met each other, and we were dating, and she was in a really bad car accident. And because of the car accident, she broke her knee, and she couldn't get out and do things for herself. So I sort of moved in and slept on the couch at the time, and I took care of her, and I went grocery shopping, and I drove her to her appointments for physio, and I helped her do these things. But during that time, even though it was a tragedy and she was, injured in her car accident, that's where we really sort of fell in love and bonded, and spent a lot of time together. And it just so happened, as soon as she healed up, she had already planned on going to Brazil. And so she was going to go there for a year to do a language study at the time. And so we spent this really cool time together, being very close and getting to know each other. And then she was gone to Brazil. And during her time in Brazil, that's when I proposed to her, and we ended up getting engaged. I proposed to her in Rio, overlooking Ipanema Beach, like the girl from Ipanema, the famous bossa nova song. And so even when she was gone, we were continuing our courtship and getting to know each other and stuff. But it all started on Denner Street, and it was this crazy year of meeting, and then the car accident and taking care of her, and then her moving to Brazil and dealing with the long distance. This is before the internet and stuff, so it was a lot of like very expensive phone bills and
old-fashioned handwritten letters.
Yeah, exactly, a lot of old-fashioned handwritten letters. Yes,
beautiful.
And
I'm loving this story.
And that's the story from Denner. And actually, this year we had our 20th anniversary in April of our very first date, and so we went back to Kalamazoo for a weekend, and we drove past our house on Denner Street and saw it, and it's still there, and it's in the student housing area when I was a master's student there. And that's the story. So the song is telling that story of the first summer that we were together, where I met Holly, and we were dating, and then the accident, and then getting to know her by taking care of her, and then her leaving at the end. And that's the period of time I was thinking about with this song.
Yeah. Tell me then, and you mentioned this tragedy at the beginning, and then it goes. So when a jazz guitarist is saying, I'm going to write a song, how do you write the tragedy part and then the happier part that comes later? What's going on in the guitar itself?
For me, when I'm thinking about more like morose kind of emotions and feelings, I'm thinking more about the harmonies and the chords. For me, I like to bring out those emotions using the harmony and the chord progression and the chords, and that's where I started with this song. And the melody was kind of improvised in the studio with Dustin, and so I started with this chord progression that's you'll hear it's a little bit sort of it's not happy, but there's an element of happiness to it, and there's an element of like somber and, you know, morose and sort of darker chords, and then it comes back and it's got these different flavors of the chords. But I like to use the chords and the harmony to really bring out those sounds. You know?
Well, here's the cab. Where are we
Yeah.
going? We're going to Denner Street.
That's
Get
it.
in, Matt. Show me where this romantic place is. Obviously, you're very well educated in the world of jazz, and this song here that we're going to play up next, Going West. Are we talking Wes Montgomery?
Yes.
Ah, cool.
This is
I know a few things,
Yeah.
and a few guitarists, but give us a little background on Going West and Wes Montgomery in particular.
So Wes Montgomery was the first jazz guitarist that I really sort of sunk my teeth into his recordings and fell in love with his playing, both as a listener, but then as a student. And I studied his playing a lot when I was at McGill especially. And for me, you know, Wes has a certain rhythmic sound. People talk about his playing with his thumb and his octave playing, which is unique to him. I always think about Wes's rhythmic qualities because he was very unique. For me, he was very unique with his choice of rhythms, and he had a very strong rhythmic feel. So I wanted to bring that out in this song. And Going West, this song is also telling the story of Holly and I moving west. So we were living in England. We lived there from about 2011 till 2015, 2016. And then we were moving back to North America, and we decided to go west. And we were looking at three places: Vancouver, Portland, and then Arizona, Tucson. And we settled on Tucson because after living in England for 5 years, it was the warmest, driest, hottest, sunniest place that we could find, at the exact opposite of Northwest England, where we lived in Manchester and Chester. So this song is sort of telling the story of that journey, plus it's a little bit of a homage to Wes and his rhythms and a little bit of his sort of vocabulary, his the language he used when he played and when he improvised.
And I looked it up, and Montgomery passed in 1968.
Yes, very
so
young.
he didn't live very long.
No.
Born in 1923.
Yeah.
So, and jazz is really not that old in the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't 100 years. What's 100 years? And jazz itself, certainly commercially, is even less, fewer years, right?
Yeah.
So is he a foundational
Yes.
player in the world of jazz guitar?
Yeah, so for me, there's a direct lineage. So Charlie Christian, you could say, is like the father of modern jazz guitar. There were other great players at the time, but he was the one that kind of stands out throughout history, and he directly influenced Wes Montgomery. So there's the lineage. It was Charlie Christian passed the torch to Wes Montgomery, who then passed the torch to other players like George Benson, etc. going forward. Of course, that's cutting out a huge amount of influential players, but if you think about, say, like, Charlie Christian and then Wes Montgomery going into George Benson and Pat Metheny, there's this sort of lineage where these great players sort of pass the torch to the next top player of that generation, depending on who you ask. And so for me, I've always enjoyed studying that history through the playing, and especially with what we call the language. So you can hear stuff that Charlie Christian did with the Benny Goodman Band and back in the early swing days that then Wes did in the late 50s, early 60s to the mid 60s that Benson was doing or still doing today. I saw Benson a few years ago and he's still doing that language, and Pat Metheny took that language, and each player takes the language from the previous player and then makes it their own. And I really enjoy studying that kind of thing, and I brought that out here. So a lot of these lines that you're hearing, like the single note lines, were influenced from that Wes kind of, like my interpretation of Wes's vocabulary, which is really fun.
Awesome. So it's Matt Warnock, going Wes.
That's it.
I gotta say, it's a whole new listening experience to do the story behind the songs, and suddenly after the story, the music just pops out. So in listening to all the tracks when you sent them to me, Heat Wave was a track that, the name of course right off, and Motown did a big song with it, and you just finished talking about the heat of Arizona, and I'm thinking, okay, man, Heat Wave, and I guess if I could put it, to me it was one of the catchier numbers of this, so this should be interesting.
So for this one, it's the most composed song on the record. It was the first song that I wrote when I decided to make the recording. So in August of 2022, I decided that, I've been planning on doing my own solo guitar record for a number of years, and I said, you know what, if I keep planning, I'm never going to do it. So let's just start recording, and it might take a year, it might take 20 years, but at least I'll start, and we'll get going.
Good idea.
Yeah, so I just started writing this song, and the way that I write is I improvise a lot. I'm really big on improvisation and just sort of free association to find ideas. So here I was just riffing in my studio at home, and I'm playing through some different ideas, and I would get an idea I liked, and then I would develop it and take it further. And I was thinking about the irony, because I'm sitting here in Sault Ste. Marie, and it's August, and it was this 5-day heat wave that was going through, and we don't have air conditioning in our house because it's Sault Ste. Marie. And I was like, wow, this is really hot, like this. And I'm thinking, I just moved from Arizona to get away from the heat. And here I am in Sault Ste. Marie, like sweating when I'm playing guitar and roasting. And I'm like, wow, this is a little bit funny, So I just started thinking about, how those things in life, like, you plan to move away from the heat and the heat follows you and all these things. And, like we moved from England to Arizona to get to the heat. And of course it snowed every year in Arizona, which is like, it never happens, but we had snow on the ground every year. And so, yeah, I was just thinking about those funny moments in life. And this one's a little bit more into what we would call modal jazz. So modal jazz is, you think of like Miles Davis in the 60s, like So What, and Kind of Blue, that record is modal jazz. Which I think is still the #1 selling record of all time for a jazz artist. And so I was borrowing some of the harmonies and melodies that you would hear in modal jazz, where rather than moving to different keys or to all these different chords, as a player, I'm playing around with the sounds of one chord or one scale or one mode. And so here it's based a lot on the Dorian mode, which is second mode of the major scale for those music theory people out there listening. And it's got a really cool sort of, it's minor, but it's what we call a bright minor sound. So it has this note called the natural 6, and it just sort of raises the brightness of this minor mode. And I really enjoy playing with this mode and exploring the different sounds. And so I came up with some riffs, and then from there I went in and this was a really cool recording. So this guitar that we're recording is a solid body electric guitar, but it's not plugged in. And so we recorded it with microphones on my hands. And I think actually we did do one direct signal to the board just to have a little bit of for some tone, but it's very, very low in the mix. Most of what we're hearing on this song is we had this whole contraption set up with like 6 microphones all around my guitar, getting the natural acoustic sound of a solid body electric guitar, which shouldn't have an acoustic sound. But this guitar was built by a friend of mine, Dan Canetop. He's a luthier out in Los Angeles. I met him when he was in Chicago. And it's what's called chambered. So there's sort of air pockets inside the electric guitar. You can't see them, they're inside, but they help the wood vibrate, and it gives it this really cool sound. And the guitar I was playing, it's made from California redwood, which you cannot harvest, but if you find it in the forest, which Dan did, then you can have it certified that it was found redwood, and it takes years to do this. And so this block of redwood, I think they said it was 250 years old from the time it was born, and then it lived its life, and then fell, and then it was found decades later, and then it was certified that we could use it to build guitars. And so that's what my guitar is built out of. And it looks like bright red, but it's natural color. There's no paint on it or any kind of finish on it. Yeah.
How many guitars do you have?
I have 2 Canetops made by Dan, very similar. He calls them the MATT casters because they're based on the Telecaster model. And yeah, so I have those 2, and then I have a 1966 Fender Telecaster that my wife Holly bought me when we were dating, when we were living on Denver Street, as a gift, and very, very cool gift. And then I have a classical guitar that I don't really play very much, but I used to play more. And then I have a guitar I just had built by Jubilee Original Guitars in Sault Ste. Marie. So when I moved back, I had this guitar built, and it was built with all woods from the local area, and it was built by John and Keith, who work for Jubilee Guitars. And that's going to be played on my next album, because it wasn't ready, so it was being built while I was recording this record, and it's going to be featured on my next record. All the songs were recorded on my new guitar by Jubilee.
Let's heat it up. Jazz, of course, it takes all kinds of music, and probably most closely associated are the blues. Any history, any documentaries I'll watch, of course, it's usually about southern U.S. and cotton fields and that kind of thing. You have a song called Lone Pine Blues on Homecoming. What's the story?
So Lone Pine is a musician from, I believe he might have been born in Maine, but he lived his life mostly in Toronto and Winnipeg, and then he moved to Nashville, and then he died in Los Angeles very young, and that's Lenny Breau. And Lenny Breau is one of my great guitar heroes. For people listening, you probably never heard of him. He's one of the greatest guitar players you've never heard of. And Lenny Breau was one of the first musicians known for sort of playing in a piano style, where he's playing that left and right hand of a piano kind of at the same time. And when his parents were musicians, and when he was really young, like 3 years old, he would go on stage and sing in the parents' country band. They'd take him on tour, and he would go on stage and put the little cowboy outfit on. And there's a really great album cover called Boy Wonders, the album, and it's got him in a little outfit, taking a black and white photo back in probably the early 50s. And I believe his father's name was Lone Pine. That was his nickname when he performed. And when Lenny was a kid, they would call him Lone Pine Jr. And I believe that's the story. There's a lot of sort of things with Lenny Breau that weren't well documented because he wasn't well known. But he did have a TV show that he played on in Winnipeg, like every Wednesday for like a decade or so. So if you were in Winnipeg in the 60s, you would have seen Lenny play.
So sorry, where was he from?
I believe he was born in Maine, But then he grew
Right.
up in Winnipeg. His parents moved to Winnipeg,
Oh.
and then he lived a lot, many years in Toronto, and then he moved to Nashville, and he recorded. Chet Baker not Chet Baker, Chet Atkins helped him sort of get discovered and did some producing for him and stuff. And then he went out to LA and did some teaching and playing out there. And then he died very tragically when he was in his early 40s. It's still an open case, and they don't know if he was murdered or if he died, but he was found drowned in his pool.
Thus the blues here.
Thus the blues, yes.
And this is a tribute to Lenny Breau and Lone Pine, and in the style of
Lenny, yeah. And you can hear it with the little melody, and then you hear those chords and those little stabs. That's the influence from Lenny. It's like a two hands of a piano approach to playing guitar.
There's a piece there in Lone Pine Blues where the recording on here is all guitar, but it sure sounds like an upright bass player is going at it.
Yeah. So that comes from from playing with a lot of vocalists. And when I was younger, I did a lot of gigs with my wife, who's a jazz singer, as well as other vocalists. And when you do a lot of jazz gigs, to make more money as a young poor student, we would just do duos. So I would say, okay, let's get this gig, and there'd be a singer, and I would say I'll play all the other parts. And so I would just walk a bass line and play the chords, and I learned how to walk a bass line to accompany the singers. And so it would have that low bass kind of sound, and I would have the chords in the middle, and I would do my improvising as well. And so I used to do a Tuesday, Wednesday night gig in Kalamazoo when I was a student there, and I had lots of singers, duos, trios sometimes, but mostly just duos. And it'd be me for 3 hours walking bass lines and comping, and that's where I got my chops together for that.
Yeah, nothing like busking, right, to get the chops down. SJDR is another track on here.
Yes.
You're a graduate of Sir James Dunn?
I am a graduate of Sir James Dunn, but this song is not about Sir James Dunn.
Well,
although
sure,
it's very similar.
Yeah, you know too that I also have a graduate at Sir James Dunn, so it's not, eh? What is SJDR then?
So SJDR is named after a city in Brazil, São João del Rei, and St. John the King, I think, is the translation.
Yes, it is.
And And it's a city that's up in the mountains, and it's not very well known, but I have a really good friend who's a professor at the university there, and so he's brought me in there to teach and to perform many times. For listeners, if you know the city Ouro Preto, which is a very famous Brazilian city, it's just like an hour from there. It's very close. So it's way up in the mountains. It's this beautiful city. There's a river that goes right through the middle of the city that's dry most of the year, and then it gets rainy and it gets like 20 feet deep, and then it rushes through, and then it gets dried out again. And so there's this ever-changing kind of feel to it, and I have just some great memories of being there. And my friend had this apartment that was in the sort of the town square, and I would be lying there at night, like in his spare room trying to sleep after a gig. And because the town square was there, I was hearing like conversations and noise and music coming from like 17 different restaurants and clubs and stuff. And the way that it echoed through his apartment, it had this kind of wash of sound that came through. And in Brazil, they don't have screens on their windows, and he didn't even have windows in some of his. They would just open holes above the windows in sort of decorative fashion, and there was just air always flowing through, and you would see the like the exotic birds flying by, and there was a beautiful Portuguese church just across the street, so you'd hear the bells in the morning. And this is the things that I was thinking about with this song, was being at my friend's apartment and being there, and then the gigs we would play, and the teaching I would do with the students there. It was just a really great time. I've been there probably 7 or 8 times, and it's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. In your time there, did you play with a lot of Brazilian musicians?
Yes, a
and
lot.
Learn from them?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah. I learned a lot about samba and what we call samba jazz, which is a mixture of like American jazz and Brazilian samba. And I played a lot with bass players, drummers, saxophonists, vocalists, classical guitarists, jazz guitarists, everyone. And it was really cool.
What did they think of this Canadian guy from Northern Land, and suddenly he's picking up on our music? And I'm thinking that you're picking up on it pretty quick.
Not the first time I went. So the first time I went, I remember going and I would play my lead parts, which I was really good at from the jazz stuff, and I would improvise, and they were like, wow, that's amazing. And then my friends would be like, but your rhythm, you have this like gringo rhythm that just does not translate here. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went back, and I was living just south of Chicago at the time after my first visit to Brazil, and I sought out a guy named Paulino Garcia, who was a very famous Chicago. He sort of retired to Los Angeles now, but he lived in Chicago. He's from Brazil. And I sought him out, and I contacted him. I said, listen, I'm going back to Brazil in a few months for this second tour. I have to learn how to do samba rhythms and bossa. Can I come get some lessons? And I went for about 4 lessons to his house in Chicago, and he sat down and he said, this is what you have to do. And the second time I went back, all my friends were like, oh, Eureka, you got it. This gringo can learn. They were laughing at me. Or laughing with me, because I was laughing too. It was funny. And then from there, I really got into the Brazilian rhythm study, and it's a big part of my playing. Yeah.
right. So as we're going through this here, I'm hearing, which I didn't pick up on first listen, a lot of Brazilian influence.
Mm-hmm.
And then I look at this song title, Sonora,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not an English word.
Nope. And it's not Portuguese either.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say that. Sonora is in Portuguese. Again, Brazilian is, it's a bastardized Portuguese. And
those fighting words. No.
Yeah, exactly. And Sonora's a carrot.
Mm-hmm.
So
this isn't that.
This isn't that either.
No, this is different. So for anyone who has wintered in Arizona, there's the Sonoran Desert. And it's a huge part of southern Arizona where I lived for about six and a half years or so with my wife and my 2 dogs. And I have two pointer dogs. And if you know pointers, they're super high energy and they need lots of walks, which in Arizona is actually tough because, there's 7 months out of the year where it's actually dangerous to go out hiking if you're not prepared, especially with animals, because they can't go for very long without water, and the heat is incredible, right? I mean, it's in the 50 Celsius plus. And so we would get up really early in the morning. I used to get up at 4 a.m. in the summers and take my dogs out in the Sonoran Desert and walk them around before it got too hot. We had to be home by about 8 a.m. at the latest 7 a.m. before it got too hot for them. And then we would go out in the evenings. We lived in Tucson, and it's sort of surrounded by 7 peaks, kind of like how Rome is and stuff. It's the same kind of idea. And as soon as the sun goes behind the mountain, my dogs would be at the door because they would know, like when it got a little hazy, it's time to go. And then we would get out and we would go walk them in the desert. So I wrote this song about not any specific hike we used to do, but like a group of hikes we used to do up in the mountains in Arizona. And if you've ever been to the Tucson area of Arizona and southern Arizona, if you go hiking, it's just up, down, up, down, up, down, because it's just hilly and mountains and all sorts of cool stuff. And so
once you decide on the subject matter
mm-hmm.
of the song, then you still now have to think about the sound of it,
mm-hmm.
the musicality of it, and where's that connection to Arizona when you decide, okay, I'm going to write about my dogs and my hikes. What music is...
It's fully improvised as far as the ideas. So what I would do is I would sit down with my guitar and I'd close my eyes and I would picture the hikes. And I would think of one of the hikes I really liked is called the Agua Caliente Trail, the hot water trail. And it goes up this mountain and through this huge sort of ravines up in the mountains. And actually, from one point of view, you can see Paul McCartney's ranch from up there because he has a ranch out there. And it's pretty cool. And then you can see huge views of the entire city once you get way up in the mountain. And so I would just close my eyes and I'd think about hiking up with my dogs and the twists and turns. And then I'd be playing and I'd be kind of just trying to play the scene, if that makes sense. Like trying to play what I was feeling and thinking and seeing, and the saguaros and all the different flowers and everything. And then that would become the idea, and then I would develop the idea from there. So
it sounds like how I would think when they hire someone to do soundtrack or the
mm-hmm.
score to a film.
Exactly. It's a pretty similar process. I use more information or more improvisation than, say, a composer would. Not all composers, but most composers, they tend to find an idea and then develop it, but the idea is based on the scene or whatever they're writing for. And for me, I'd like to just free associate and just say, okay, I'm not going to try to put my own personal stamp on it until the idea has come to me naturally, like sort of organically, and then I'll take it and then I'll sort of work it a little bit and then let the improvisation develop it.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, it's the dogs that wrote the song.
Yeah, it's Carmen and Stevie. Carmen, who's named after Carmen McRae, the great jazz singer, and Stevie is named after Stevie Ray Vaughan, but also Stevie Nicks and Stevie Wonder and Stevie Winwood and just all the Stevies who play music and sing. So.
Oh, wow. Well, this isn't the place, but I'll tease you. I did meet Stevie Ray Vaughan right here in Sault Ste. Marie one day, but that's a teaser, and we'll leave that story untold.
Well, I can't wait to hear it. Is it the last three, or is there one more?
Yeah,
This is
we
the
are
last.
coming to the last of the
little
record
group,
here. There's a couple of short pieces, prelude, interlude, and coda. And seeing as prelude and interlude are really short pieces, do they connect other songs? Are they standalones?
They're a little bit of both. So this was the last day of recording before we did mixing and mastering. And I came in with my guitar, and Dustin was like, well, do you have any more songs? And I said, no. And he said, well, do you want to do anything else? And I said, well, why not just improvise a few short pieces, and we'll stick them at the beginning, middle, and end. And we'll call them prelude, interlude, and coda. And so he said, okay, great. He hit record. I played the first piece, stop. Just off the top of my head, I had no idea what I was going to play. Went to the second piece, played it, stop, great. First take, it was perfect, at least for us. And then we got to the third piece, coda, hit play or hit record, recorded it, perfect, great, done. We did it all in about 8 minutes. And what's interesting is that coda, which probably took less than, I think it's 2.5 minutes long or 2 minutes long. It's or not even. It took just a few minutes to actually record, and then we mixed and mastered it very quickly. And it's by far the most played song on the record. I mean, there's tens of thousands of plays, and I don't know why. It probably got put on some playlist and people really enjoy it, which is great. But it's something that I just did, was the very last part of the recording sort of sessions for this record, and I just sat down and did it off the cuff, and it took probably 2.5 minutes to do the entire song, start to finish, from writing, from like thinking of just playing, recording, done.
Wow.
That was it.
You gotta bottle that somehow, right? So how can I reenact that whole thing? And I'll cut an album in 43 minutes.
Well, that's my next project, is to do. We're going to be working a lot on sort of spontaneous recording. So we started doing this last year, and we're going to do this over the next year or two, where I go in and we just do an hour of me just improvising, either for the full hour or short little pieces or longer pieces, and then we'll put it all together and we'll pick the ones we like, and then we'll find it. But the next album that I do after the current one, which I'm finishing up, is going to be all improvised. Like, just I'm going to have no ideas, just sit down, it'll be fully in the moment, and then we'll put that together that way.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, this has been really, really interesting and
thank you.
Super cool. It's a little bit like your
great.
Recording of coda, to come in and have this idea of doing across the tracks on an album with no lyrics.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, there really are a ton of lyrics.
There's always a story.
There's a story.
Yes.
That's a better way to put it. Yeah. Homecoming. Matt Warnock, thanks. If someone wants to get this record,
Spotify, iTunes, Google Music, everywhere online.
how about a physical copy?
I didn't do physical copies for this one, although you can download it from iTunes and at Bandcamp, I believe. But it's I didn't do physical copies. I'm a purely digital person at this point. So.
Right. Okay, this has been Across the Tracks. Homecoming. Matt Warnock, jazz guitar at its absolute finest anywhere. Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me.
we've gone across the tracks. This has been a Borderline Entertainment production.